those that were here last year certainly know I'm a World War II history geek. My company, Digital Shadows, started in London, and I just hit my 2-year anniversary last week, and I've been to the UK 9 times. And so when I'm there over the weekends, I always go and do all kinds of military history things to see. Anyone been to RAF Duxford before? Any of the Imperial War Museum museums? They're awesome. RAF Duxford is a live museum. You can actually get in Spitfires. They're quite expensive. You can go up for 45-minute flights. But I geek out there. And some of you may have seen in previous talks this analogy I'm going to use about analysis, but it's really relevant for here. They have a U.S. aviation museum at Duxford. So of course we have SR-71 and we have a U-2 kind of positioned like Powers would have potentially been positioned when he was shot down. A little bit when I was in the Army, I worked with the U-2, as opposed to some of the other assets we also work with too, but total geek out here for an intel person, a military history person, and general geek. I love Duxford. They also have a land warfare museum. Does anyone here, maybe targeting people, know if this is a BMP-1 or a BMP-2? So this is a BMP-1. And you can tell from, as a former imagery guy, the size of the turret on top is one of the indicators for it. But I use this to tell an analogy of a young specialist Holland who went TDY to the Eisenhower when I was in Kuwait, and I was working with the ISs there, and we were doing imagery from the TARPS platform. And we were looking in southern Iraq, and Specialist Holland made a mistake, and he called a BMP-1 a BMP-2. Does anyone know the significance of what this would have been between the 2 Iraq wars? Only the Republican Guards divisions had BMP-2. So Specialist Holland basically called out an Iraqi Republican Guards division further south than they should have been. And it hit the fan, things were spinning up. There wasn't a lot of analytical rigor in Specialist Holland at the time. And so I use this as a really good example of making a mistake, maybe not having enough peer review as well. A lot of analytical failures. Didn't really turn out to be that big of a deal, but for a little while it was a problem. But I really think it's a good way to lead into, analysis matters. Certainly if you're in the intelligence community, it might mean something different than it would be in the private sector. But in the private sector, it could be your livelihood, depending on what type of work you're doing, commercial sector, competitive intelligence, whatever the case may be. So I always like to use this as a lead-in on analysis. And my personal failure, I like to make fun of myself a lot. And there's a lot of things to make fun of. Of course, I'm not going to go into Dick Heuer Jr.'s book here. I've had this on the slides probably for 3 years now. But what I wanted to try to do is evolve, is look back. I've spoke every year at the conference. I've coordinated the conference with the advisory board as well for the past 3 years. And so I've had this slide up. And what I was thinking about this year is like, okay, enough about just showing this slide and telling you to read this book. I want to try to move the conversation forward on better analysis. This book, how many people have read this PDF? You can download it for free, right? One takeaway, if you haven't read this PDF, highly recommended that you do it. It's probably one of the top 5 things you should read in the space. Also Thinking Fast and Slow, but I think the first time I saw Carmen talk, she also recommended that book, and I read that as a result. So I'm not going to read all this to you. I was going to highlight some of the important parts, but it's really about externalizing and decomposing our thinking. I think we have a lot of lone gunmen. Maybe that's not the best analogy. People that are champions. They want to do it. Heroes, that's what I was looking for, superheroes. They want to do it themselves. They want to save the day. They want to get all the kudos for this incident response analysis or this threat intelligence analysis. And really what I like about structured analysis is you're exposing what you're thinking about, and you're getting more analytical rigor into what you're doing. There's a number of cognitive biases, and Carmen mentioned some of them, and I'm going to go through a couple. You could do a whole session on just cognitive biases alone, but here's confirmation bias. Facebook right now, if you looked on Facebook, is probably the #1 source of confirmation bias in these hyper-political times. Another one is mirror imaging. Anyone familiar with mirror imaging or Enter the Dragon? So if you've seen this movie, it's probably one of the top 5 movies ever made. He can't find, he's being attacked, he's being scratched, and essentially he has to break the mirrors. So you actually need to do this in your analysis. You need to break through your mirrors. Mirror imaging is basically when you look at and you make an assessment through your lens and not the person who may be targeting you's lens. You're not taking into context their social situation, their geopolitical situation, them. There's actually a technique called red hat analysis. I'm not going to talk about it today, really, but that can be used to overcome mirror imaging. Anchoring. And I think Carmen also mentioned anchoring in one context. Is anyone familiar with anchoring? We actually see this a lot with university students. At my company, we recruit a lot of people from King's College in London, graduate programs in intelligence studies, and there's a tendency with students that go through programs that maybe the first analytical technique they stick with. So you can anchor on the techniques that you know, and then you can also anchor on maybe the first assessment that you have. And then perhaps it comes, oh, this is the way it's always been, so it's going to stay this way type of piece. So we don't want to anchor either our techniques or our assessments. And then, of course, groupthink. And I think everyone's familiar with groupthink. I think this is a pretty good illustration of groupthink as well. And this is what a psychologist who coined the term groupthink, Irving Janis, talked about these conditions that make groupthink possible. And I'm not going to read through them all, but if you look at your org structure, if you maybe a student, a fan of organizational behavior, some of these things might reside in your organizations. But there's one in particular that I highlighted in red. It was the situational factors that contribute to groupthink, and I think it's really important for this audience to be aware of. How many people would describe themselves as this individual in their jobs? Are you ever tired? Are you ever stressed out? Are you ever working long days stuck on a console for ArcSight? Or looking at packet captures, right? The very nature of our role, no matter if you're an incident responder, an intel analyst, anyone in cybersecurity today in the threat landscape we have, is you're tired. So we really need to be aware that fatigue can cause groupthink and really try to take steps to protect ourselves or take care of ourselves to try to avoid that. You know, sleeping more than 4 hours a night is highly recommended. One of my New Year's resolutions was try to sleep 7 hours a night. I'm not doing very good at it. It's ACH. How many people have done ACH in their careers at some point? There's a fair amount of hands. With this audience, I would expect it. This is an ACH that we did at Digital Shadows on WannaCry and actually made the Internet Storm Center. But I don't want to talk about ACH. I was not exposed to actually doing ACHs until I've been in my career at Digital Shadows, and I actually think they're a pain in the ass. They take a lot of time. Even understanding as you're setting up the assumptions that you would have in it, the scenarios you would have in it, takes a lot of time. But ACH is probably one that gets the most headlines these days. People are talking about them and using them. So I want to think beyond that. So I'm not going to talk about ACH because I actually think it takes too much time, and there's other techniques that you can use. There's a whole lot of techniques that you can use. So just a small, and I have the reference to this book at the end, there's probably 40 different structured analytic techniques on this slide. Is anyone familiar with this book? I've got it at the end. It's like a $70 or $80 book. It's probably not a bad thing to expense for your teams that are out there, and they break down all these different structured analytic techniques. But I think it's very overwhelming, and trying to know the right ones to use in the right situation is pretty important. So I was going to talk through a couple things that you might do in your organization. As you start to incorporate structured analytics into your programs, and I think you really should, I'm going to go through a scenario and go through a couple here. But you could kind of, and what I've been trying to do here is line it up to the tactical, operational, and strategic goals that you might have from an intel perspective on different types of structured analytic techniques that you could use. I think I'm a newbie on this. You know, Rob in his intro said no one's a pro here, no one's an expert. I am by no means an expert in structured analytic techniques. But I have been working with them. I've done structured brainstorming, I've done ACH, I've done SWOTs, red hat analysis, Kona plausibility. But you probably are going to have some that are going to be in your stable, and you're going to use them, and it's important to refresh them from time to time. But what I would recommend is you start to try to map different techniques to different things that you're going to produce in your environment. How many people on an ongoing basis in the room actually have structured analysis built into the different intelligence products you create? I see one hand, and that's an Army hand. So typically, that's what you'll find, unless you're maybe a very large Silicon Valley technology company with large intelligence teams, or you come from the intelligence community, you're not doing this. But the whole point of my talk today is that you don't have to do these crazy-ass ACH that take a lot of time, or potentially take a lot of time. Once you have them down, you can do them quicker. There's an easy way to do it, or easier. And this is the third time over the past 6 months at a conference where I've talked about this topic. And I'll talk to people afterwards, and really this is what comes back, is we don't have time for this. Our hair's on fire. We don't have time to add new things in. What I would say is you're probably already doing some types of analytics, structured analytics, that maybe you hadn't thought about, and maybe you just need to formalize a little bit more. So I want to go through a scenario, and in this scenario, you have a recently promoted CISO. Let's call him Mick. Mick came from the intelligence community, so he's really into intelligence, tradecraft, and of course, like all CISOs or C-level folks, he reads the Wall Street Journal. And he just saw this headline this week in the Wall Street Journal, and tell me if this has ever happened to you. The CISO comes and knocks on your doors and wants to know about this article in New York Times, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and starts a fire drill for your organization. Has that happened to anyone before? Yeah. Well, now I'm the one doing that now. So this is Mick, our fictional CISO's response to this, and he really wants to know what's going to happen for the organization. So I'm going to walk through, this is going to a hypothetical-ish situation. I'm going to do two techniques we'll walk through, is really to give you a flavor of how you could try to apply this to a real-world scenario from your CISO that's oh-my-godding the news. So we won't go into detail on some of these things, others we will, but I just want to give you a flavor of how you could actually incorporate something like this into your program. And you could use other techniques as well, but just a flavor. So one that I think is really, really important and actually doesn't take a ton of time is a key assumptions check. I think this is really important for a lot of different things. For those of us that are on the vendor side and we're producing our super cool intelligence reports, this sort of stuff, if you're on the vendor side and you're writing research that you're using for thought leadership marketing purposes, you really should be doing a lot of structured analysis inside of your research. But key assumptions check is really, really important. It's the foundation of your intelligence products. And if you're making faulty assumptions, and in intelligence, there's no certainty, right? We don't know everything. So it's really important to do this. And this goes back to what Carmen was talking about, is you need to have a culture that will allow you to question other people's assumptions, right? We have to not have hubris. We need to be humble. We need to recognize that we don't know everything, that another perspective could be a better perspective or complement your perspective. So you really want to understand the evidence and reasoning behind something. So in the scenario that we're walking through on cryptocurrency fraud, Mick, our CISO, works for a financial institution, so he's definitely concerned about the implications of cryptocurrency in general, and then fraud in particular. We've got a number of key assumptions. And so these are the assumptions there. A couple of them, new alternative coins and exchanges will emerge. Cryptocurrencies will eventually be adopted by major retailers and financial institutions. Some of these are trailing trends anyway, but we're making those assumptions and we're making them clear up front. So whenever you start any type of analytical process, whoever's the team is working on writes these assumptions down, and then, if you're fans of Silicon Valley, you get the stick-it notes out. And you start, and actually Carmen referenced this with structured brainstorming, another way that you can do this exercise as well. You get the sticky pads out. And you start to ask yourself these questions about the assumptions that you've made. What would make an assumption untrue? What if it was true in the past, but it's no longer true? Assign a confidence level to the assumption. And then basically, and there's some others that you can add into the mix here, but that's a high level of what you would do. You ask these questions about each of these key assumptions, and then you rate them. Is it solid? We feel really good about this assumption. It's valid. It's caveated, meaning something must happen in order for this, or it's unsupported. And then if it's unsupported, throw it out. So I would say for any kind of intelligence product, this is the type of activity that you want to have. And this is not something that's going to take a long time. You could do this in an hour, and I'm going to talk about some remote and collaboration tools that you can use as well. For my organization, I have people from Greece to London, East Coast, Central, West Coast, so it's a large distributed team. So there's some challenges there as well. So now we have the assumptions, and one of the things about the key assumptions check, even if you were to do an ACH, there's many of these techniques where assumptions are going to be a component of it. So this is using one structured analytic technique to build upon another. Has anyone ever worked with scenario planning or futures? Has anyone ever done a Kona plausibility? So this is looking forward. And what I like about this, especially as a CISO, what I'm trying to accomplish here in this example is how you could take some intelligence assessments and actually then use them in your program. We talk about this panacea of intelligence informing business decisions and giving you decision advantage over your blah, 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 blah. My goal here is to try to start thinking about how we could actually do some of this stuff. So Kona plausibility. This is a forecasting technique. Oftentimes you'll see it in larger intelligence organizations, and they may do them further out. 2025, what can we expect? I like to make fun of forecasts not the forecast, but the predictions. As Rob said, I was a Forrester analyst, and every year in October we do these predictions. And I always like to talk about forecast and not predictions, because there was no analytic rigor really in the predictions that I would make as an industry analyst. I don't know that I was blind to that fact then, but what I like about forecasts is at least you have some rigor that's going into your thought process that you're using here. So essentially what you're trying to do is project trends, events, and their consequences, and you look at scenarios that occur. And I think from a business that is trying to plan out the implications of something, in this case cryptocurrency fraud in 2018 and 2019, you can start to talk about things in the business that they might care about, and then you start to, I'll walk through it. Let me not get ahead of myself. I have a reference for all the things that I'm talking about. I've got references at the end. So you have like one slide that you can just look at. It's similar to what I did last year. If you look at that one slide, you can just hyperlink out to all these things. So there's a lot of things in the Kona plausibility as far as the framework goes. Understanding the current conditions, so the drivers and the assumptions. So how many people are familiar with the pestle model? So you could use the pestle model to help do the drivers and assumptions. But what's driving the current state? What are the key assumptions that you're making about the state? Basically, new alternative coins are going to come, new exchanges are going to come, fraud's going to continue, what we went through on the previous one. And then you build out the scenarios. And so you have a preferred scenario, which in my experience in doing these, preferred really never happens, a probable, and then you have wild cards. Now the wild cards get I think one other thing that we need more of from an analysis perspective is creativity. So wild cards is you just pick something that's super random, that you may not have thought of, completely out of the box, and you have that as a scenario. So it's really just kind of challenge the thought that you have. And basically what you then do is you monitor for these scenarios, and then you come up with countermeasures for those scenarios. It'd be the process. We'll walk through it a little bit more. But I really think the wildcard one, in the ones that we've done internally at Digital Shadows, it's kind of fun to do that one. One that we did about 12 months ago was around DDoS botnets. And we were trying to think about how extortion actors might change with IoT botnets doing DDoS. And so one of the wildcard scenarios we had, and we've seen a little bit of this, but not a grand scale, was going to be grand scale of crowdsourcing extortion. So instead of extorting the brand, it's Christmas, and Rick wants to get on Xbox Live or PlayStation, and we take it down. And now I'm like, okay, Rick, if you pay me, $100, and we crowdsource that, then we'll bring the service back online. So that was just one example of a wildcard scenario that we did there. So this one, it's not as bad to read on that screen. It's kind of what it looks like from a large scale. You've got the drivers that you've come up with, and here are the drivers for this scenario is the accessibility of the technology, the anonymity that you have, or lack of anonymity, as some of the cyber criminals are finding out. Popularity and hype, reputation, the opportunity. There's all kinds of opportunity for fraud. The users, the exchanges, the platforms, regulation or lack thereof regulation, and then the security of individuals, consumers, and organizations. Again, this is just to be illustrative of what you could do for this. And your organization may not have anything to do with cryptocurrency. Then we have the assumptions that we talked through before on the previous slide, and then we have scenarios. And really, at a high level in scenarios, preferable is law enforcement gets their act together, regulations come into place, and the risk level goes down. Pretty unlikely, I think, for most things in our area. The most probable one, and I'm going to walk through that in subsequent slides, is the cyber criminals continue to innovate. They target the cryptocurrencies, the exchanges. They're having a lot of success. They're making a lot of profit. You might even see other types of networks that may have been used for ransomware that are moving over to this particular piece on cryptojacking as an example. And then in wildcard scenario here, heavy regulation, decrease of anonymity, the fraudulent attacks, sorry, make it smaller. The number of targets greatly decrease, and this just goes away as well. So unlikely on that scenario as well. So here we're a financial institution, Mick, the CISO, so he's concerned about the exchanges and the customers, the employees there. So you have your scenario, so you go through, you understand the drivers, you have the key assumptions, you think about 2 or 3 scenarios, and maybe you just plan for the probable because that's all you have time for, and then you start to monitor for that. You want to be able to monitor changes over time that indicate this is about to occur. And then you want to develop courses of action. Of course, military people will understand courses of action, but this would be your plan. So for me, Mick the CISO, trying to understand what do we need to do practically about this threat. So several things that I would, trying to take a change in the threat landscape and tie it back to my security program and how I might make investments or de-invest in certain areas. So things that I would want to do, in this particular case, we know that criminals are trying to use your Amazon compute for cryptojacking. So you're paying for them to mine Monero, Bitcoin, whatever the case may be. We see more Monero in a lot of cases. But here, do I have a capability to monitor GitHub? Now, GitHub does a really good job of takedown requests. There's a lot of misconfigurations. Talk about something that in our programs like shadow IT. GitHub is a really painful component of shadow IT. So here I want to understand what's out there on GitHub, what misconfigurations did someone do that shouldn't be there that's exposing risk to my organization. And then you start to see your Amazon bill going up. So this is one practical thing that I may not have a capability to do this. How can I do this? Start monitoring that. Another one, now this one probably is appropriate for everything, right? This is web browsers. So this is the cryptojacking of your users' browsers themselves, which cryptojacking in and of itself is not necessarily, using your browser resources. It reminds me, if people remember SETI at home back in the day, where you could use my computer to, that's what actually kind of what I think about a cryptojacking. I actually wouldn't mind a SETI, like if I was going to let someone mine my computer, it was a nonprofit. Let's say it's a cancer research center or something like that. I'm not necessarily opposed to letting them mine my browser if it's going to help them get Monero that they can use for research. So it's not to say that all of this cryptojacking is necessarily bad. There is some good out there potentially. But here we want to look at our browser security and the controls that we have, extensions. And I would guess for a lot of organizations, this is probably a weak area of their configuration and patch management in general. And this obviously helps out way more than just a cryptojacking scenario, right? This is everything scenario since the browser is such a prevalent attack pattern. Another one, have I been pwned? I mean, this is something that you can do for free. You can go out and look at your organization. You can also subscribe to it as well. But Troy Hunt puts together these databases. So Mick, the CISO, wants to know if any of my employees have been using their corporate email address to register on one of these exchanges that they're on. That exchange gets popped. They drain all of the coin from them, transfer it out, and then they have the email addresses of everyone out there. So what kind of risk does Mick, the CISO's team, have from employees that are reusing their corporate credentials, and even just the email address, right, and these exchanges get compromised? So this also then becomes a multi-factor authentication conversation as well. So again, what I'm trying to do is map kind of this threat that you get from the Wall Street Journal, taking it down to how do you actually change your security program as a result. Another one, and I think this one is an interesting one we were talking about. If you think about millennials, millennials are more apt to invest in cryptocurrencies. So I actually see it as an opportunity. One is I need to cover this in my security awareness training. But this, how many people have run security awareness programs in their careers? They're tough. And the way that you get people to connect, you talk about threats to their family, to their children. Well, here, for the millennials that are interested in this might be a way to connect with them. And then you talk about, hey, look, there's all kinds of fake exchanges set up, fake platforms for trading. Just understand the overall risk. I mean, if you want to make the investment, that's fine. That's your business. We're not going to give you investment advice, but just know the risk there. And oh, by the way, here's some other things that you want to think about. So this could be an opportunity to take, again, this Wall Street Journal's Oh My God article and actually do something in my organization to try to level up the security a little bit. So what can you do? There's a couple things, and these aren't going to be, there's some things that will be interesting, some are more obvious. But one, has anyone read this Cases in Intelligence Analysis? This is almost like a compendium book. It's really good. We just started in the Dallas office with our Intel analysts. We're starting to take an event, and basically it could be something like attempted assassination of anti-Putin journalists in Russia, things that have happened historically, and then this is a workbook, and they'll give you 2 to 3 structured analytic techniques to work through. What I have found to be the most valuable is, Harrison's one of the guys I do it with in my office in Dallas, is just us talking. And we're in a room, we're discussing these things, and it's just, the mere fact that you're having communication, this maybe goes back to Carmen's point about it's not about as much about the structured analytics as it is about better analysis. This has been a really good way for us to do that within our Intel team out of the Dallas office. So especially if you're a history buff as well, you'll like this because you're going back to all sorts of, there's 20 of them in there. And the book's maybe $60, something like that. So recommended take-home assignment for you. Google Docs. So this is one, now I will caveat this with, I realize Google Docs is in the cloud, so you could use another solution, but conceptually, either you host your own solution, but what I like about Google Docs, we used to use this at Forrester, we'd have all the analysts, I think we had 12 analysts on the team, and we would be brainstorming at the beginning of the year about the threat landscape, customer pain points, what do we want to write about, and it'd be ready, set, go, and then everybody just starts throwing up ideas on there, and you're seeing them pop different colors. Has anyone ever used Google Docs in this context before? It's a really good technique, especially for remote teams. And I think that's a big problem that we have just in general, especially as there's a trend for more remote workforce, and you want to enable your remote employees. So I really like this model. And then, essentially what you do is you start to group these ideas together, and you put them here, and then maybe you do a key assumptions check on that. So it's a way that you can start off with structured brainstorming, then you do key assumptions check, and then you can move on to whatever else it may be. This could be your brainstorming on the threat landscape for your organization in 2018 and beyond. Maybe this is on the vendor side, and you're trying to think of really exciting research and capabilities that you have that you want to highlight. Whatever the case may be, Google Docs is one route to go. Then you can go big. Now, I do think, anybody here a developer in a previous life? You know, developers, it's not the same everywhere, but developers do a pretty good job of collaborating, especially when you have remote product management and development teams. But there's tools like Google Jamboard, where you actually have a big TV like this, and it's interactive, and I can draw ideas on it, and then I can use it on my phone, I can use it on a tablet as well. So it really helps with both in-person collaboration for those in the office, as well as people that are remote. The TV is like $5,000, so this is, you know, you're starting to get a little bit more, but if you think of a threat intelligence team and you want to have better collaboration, and this doesn't necessarily have to be, this could be other things beyond threat intelligence. This could be, I want to draw the architecture of my environment in a real-time view so that we get a better understanding of what our architecture looks like. And Google Jamboard is not alone. Stormboard it's a Canadian company. They have an on-prem version as well. This is one I created last night on my own. And you can put the note cards on. So you can put the note cards up, everyone can do that, and then you can group the note cards and things like that. So there are some pretty nice collaboration tools out there that you can use. Again, you can have some that you host yourself, so you don't have to worry about this being in the cloud. A lot of the collaboration tools, if the content you're working on isn't sensitive in nature, they plug into Box. They plug into all the SaaS applications, and it's a really convenient way to work. Again, it depends on the content and sensitivity that you're working on. And Carmen actually mentioned this, queued me up here with IARPA. So IARPA has funded, I think it's about $50 million across 4 universities to do research in, the CREATE is the name of the program, but crowdsourcing, evidence, augmentation, thinking, and evaluation. So if you want to put a Google alert down on something to track, it's been in place, I think maybe it's May of this year. These universities are going to present their findings. Now, I don't know how much of it will actually go public, but this is a good one to put a Google alert on. And here's 3 of the specific projects that they're working on. Some of them are more focused on crowdsourcing of analysis, using AI with that. In this case, when it's a university person talking about AI versus vendor marketing, I'm more inclined to believe their AI, or maybe not have as much distaste for it, because I'm firmly in the camp of trying to machine learn and AI all the things is the wrong approach. Maybe that's my bias from being an analyst. It is my bias from being an analyst at Forrester and getting machine learned to death from everyone out there. Swarm is a wiki when you can ask questions and get responses back. Trace is another collaborative tool. So I don't know what these applications will actually come out being, but there could be something that we could leverage in the commercial sector as well. And then, of course, for our friends in the intelligence community, you may very well be able to use these types of solutions in the next several years. The one thing I would say is that SATs are not silver bullets. Just because you have structured analytic techniques doesn't mean you're not going to fail. Intelligence is at best a guessing game, right? Hopefully we can do a little bit more than that. So don't think, oh, there could be this false sense of, oh, look at all this analytic rigor. We had these 3 techniques that were used in the production of this particular product or asset, and it's good to go. no, you cannot be complacent with these. You need to revise the tool set. Carmen talked about that as well. And I think this is a great quote. I often ask if this is an overdone quote. It depends. Is this an overdone quote for this audience? Okay. I like it. Tell me what you know, what you don't know, and then most importantly, what you think is most likely to happen based on that. I think this is what's really, really important for us. I think if you look at our the way we've been focused, very much indicator focused over the years, some of this stuff isn't, this is an abstract level above where we're at. But I think just knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know is a tough piece. This goes back to the Rumsfeld analogy a little bit too, right? The unknown unknowns. But at least for the things that you know, what's your confidence level around that realm that you do know it? We know it really well, or we don't know it that well. I think this is a really important one to go off of. That's a picture from last year. I just was going to throw up a thank you slide on there, and I found that was our monument walk that we did last year. I did put as a reference a number of different things that I put on here, and if you want to go through an actual painful exercise, that second to bottom, Parks ACH software, has anyone ever used it? Do you like it? Yeah. It might just be better to go with the spreadsheet. It could be a little bit easier, but actually Parks got some other tools out there as well. There's different references, some stuff from Rand, a couple different PDFs that you can download as well. But the one call that I would have on this, and I don't know if a Slack channel is the right way to do it, but I really want to foster more conversation about better analysis in our space. So if you're interested in this, if you're passionate about it, if you have experience, please reach out to me. I'd like to form some sort of group where we can talk and collaborate on this, and then further it for the field. I don't know what it's going to look like. These may not be the right things for your organization, but I do think as we look to mature where we're at as an industry and practitioners, we need to be doing better analysis. Thank you.